The luxury cruise liner Stellar Harmony drifted through the void like a glittering jewel, its hull reflecting the light of distant stars as it carried its precious cargo of diplomats, tourists, and, unfortunately for everyone involved, one particularly precocious 6-year-old human who was about to rewrite the rules of interstellar diplomacy in the most catastrophically adorable way possible. Now, if you've never seen a Vorac up close, consider yourself lucky. These charming specimens of evolution's sense of humor stand roughly 8 feet tall, possess the general body plan of a praying mantis that's been hitting the protein shakes a little too hard, and have built their entire civilization around the simple philosophy that if something doesn't immediately whet itself in terror upon seeing you, you're clearly not trying hard enough. Ambassador Grixtal was a particularly fine example of his species, and by fine, we mean absolutely terrifying in every conceivable way. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed like polished obsidian. Razor-sharp claws extended from his forearms with the casual menace of switchblades, and his compound eyes could track 17 different targets simultaneously, while calculating exactly how many pieces he could carve each one into. When Grixtal spoke, it sounded like someone had taught a garbage disposal to use proper grammar. He had come aboard the Stellar Harmony with a very specific mission: to remind the various species of the galaxy exactly why the Vorac hegemony was not to be trifled with. This involved a series of carefully orchestrated diplomatic encounters, which is a polite way of saying ritualized intimidation sessions designed to keep everyone properly terrified and respectful. The Vorac, you see, had turned intimidation into an art form. They had protocols for everything: the ritual of dominance for establishing hierarchy, the display of claws for settling disputes, and the vocalization of supremacy for those special occasions when you really needed to make someone question their life choices. Grixtal had spent 847 cycles perfecting these techniques, and he was very, very good at his job, which made what happened next all the more educational. The human delegation was gathered in the ship's main diplomatic lounge, a sprawling chamber with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the nebula they were currently passing through. Ambassador David Park stood with his wife Isabella, both of them wearing the slightly strained expressions of parents who were desperately hoping their daughter would remember to use her inside voice during formal diplomatic proceedings. 6-year-old Amy Park had other plans. She had already managed to scandalize the Centaurian delegation by asking their ambassador why his nose was so wiggly, charmed the crystalline Silani by offering to share her juice box because everyone gets thirsty, and deeply confused the aquatic hydrants by wondering aloud if they ever got all pruny, like she did in the bathtub. Amy possessed that particular combination of fearless curiosity and complete social obliviousness that made 6-year-olds simultaneously delightful and absolutely terrifying to be around in formal settings. She had blonde pigtails that seemed to have a life of their own, a gap-toothed smile that could melt the coldest diplomatic heart, and the unshakable conviction that everyone she met was a potential friend who just hadn't realized it yet. "Amy, sweetheart," Isabella whispered, kneeling down to her daughter's level. "Remember what we talked about. Diplomatic voice, okay?" "I know, Mommy," Amy replied in what she clearly believed was a whisper, but was actually audible to roughly half the lounge. "I'm being very diplomatic." David caught the amused glances from several alien delegates and managed a weak smile. She's still learning the protocols. That's when the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Grixtal had entered the diplomatic lounge with the fluid grace of a predator who knew exactly how dangerous he was. His footsteps made no sound on the plush carpeting, but somehow everyone felt his presence like a cold wind down their spine. Conversations died mid-sentence. Delegates suddenly found urgent reasons to examine their drinks or the fascinating patterns in the carpet. The Vorac ambassador surveyed the room with those multifaceted eyes, cataloging threats, measuring distances, calculating angles of attack. This was his domain now, and everyone in it would know their place in the food chain before he was done. He had selected the human delegation for his first demonstration. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community, still naive about the realities of interstellar politics. A proper intimidation display would establish the natural order of things and serve as an object lesson for the other species present. Grixtal approached the Park family with deliberate, measured steps. His claws extended with soft snick sounds that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. His mandibles clicked rhythmically, a sound that in Vorac culture meant prepare to submit or prepare to die. David and Isabella froze as 8 feet of nightmare fuel positioned itself directly in front of them. This was the ritual of dominance, and they knew enough about Vorac culture to understand they were supposed to avert their eyes, back away slowly, and acknowledge their inferior status in the cosmic pecking order. Grixtal reared up to his full height, spreading his forearms wide to display the full span of his reach. His exoskeleton caught the light like black mirror, and his compound eyes fixed on the human family with the intensity of a targeting system. When he spoke, his voice was the sound of metal grinding against stone. "I am Grixtal of the Vorac hegemony," he announced, each word carefully enunciated to maximize its intimidating effect. "Behold my form, and despair, for I am death incarnate, the shadow that devours light, the—" "Oh, wow!" The delighted shriek came from somewhere around knee level, and Grixtal's perfectly rehearsed intimidation speech ground to a halt as he looked down to see Amy Park staring up at him with absolutely radiant joy. "You look just like Buzzy," she exclaimed, clapping her hands together, "from my favorite show. He's this really cool bug who solves mysteries and helps people, and he's awesome!" There was a moment of absolute silence in the diplomatic lounge. Several delegates later swore they could actually hear the sound of Grixtal's worldview cracking. "I dot," Grixtal began, his intimidation protocols desperately searching for a response to aggressive enthusiasm from tiny mammalian offspring. His training had covered fear, submission, defiance, even the occasional inappropriate mating display from confused species. But this was uncharted territory. Amy, oblivious to the complete breakdown of interstellar protocol occurring around her, took his hesitation as an invitation to get better acquainted. She toddled forward with the fearless determination of a child who had never met a stranger. Only friends she hadn't hugged yet. "Are you really tall, or am I really short?" she asked conversationally, having to crane her neck back at an almost impossible angle to look up at his face. "I think you might be really tall. Do you bump your head on doors? My Uncle Pete is really tall, and he bumps his head all the time, and Mommy says it's because he doesn't pay attention. But I think maybe doors are just too short for tall people." David and Isabella watched in mounting horror as their daughter conducted what appeared to be a casual interview with a creature that could theoretically disassemble her into component atoms without breaking a sweat. Around the lounge, other delegates were frozen in fascination, watching what might have been either the most successful diplomatic breakthrough in galactic history or the shortest career in ambassadorial service. "Your eyes are really pretty," Amy continued, apparently taking Grixtal's continued silence as rapt attention to her observations. "They're like those fancy window things in the big church we visited, with all the little pieces that make pictures. Do you see lots of pictures with all those eyes? That must be really cool." Grixtal's mandibles moved soundlessly. In 847 cycles of existence, through countless battles and diplomatic encounters, he had never experienced a complete system failure quite like this. His predatory instincts were screaming contradictory messages. "Threat detected," followed immediately by "threat is extremely small, and appears to be complementing your ocular structure?" "Aye." He tried again, his voice coming out as more of a confused rumble than the intimidating growl he'd intended. "I am a fearsome predator." "What do you like to eat?" Amy asked with genuine curiosity. "I hope it's not people, because that would be super gross and also really mean. I like mac and cheese best, but Mommy makes me eat vegetables too." "Do you have to eat vegetables? I bet being big means you have to eat lots of vegetables." Isabella finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a squeak. "Amy, sweetie, maybe we should—" But Amy had already made her decision about the proper course of action. With the absolute certainty that only a 6-year-old could possess, she determined that this interesting new friend looked like he needed something very specific. A hug. Before anyone could react, Amy Park, all 3.5 feet and 42 pounds of her, launched herself forward and wrapped her tiny arms around Grixtal's lower left leg, in what was quite possibly the most diplomatically inappropriate embrace in recorded galactic history. "You seem sad," she announced, her voice slightly muffled by chitinous armor plating. "Hugs make everything better. That's what Daddy says, and Daddy's really smart about stuff." Grixtal stood frozen, staring down at the small human who had somehow managed to circumvent millions of years of evolutionary intimidation techniques through the simple expedient of aggressive affection. Her arms barely reached halfway around his leg armor, but she was hugging with the determined intensity of someone who took the job very seriously. "Your outside is really hard," Amy observed, patting his exoskeleton experimentally. "But I bet your inside is soft. Mean people don't have compound eyes that sparkly. Only nice people have sparkly eyes." Around the diplomatic lounge, delegates were witnessing what historians would later describe as the exact moment when interspecies relations took a sharp left turn into completely uncharted territory. The Centaurian ambassador had his recording device out, though whether for diplomatic archives or personal entertainment was unclear. The Siliani delegation was creating what appeared to be crystalline sculptures in real time, their bodies resonating with what could only be described as aesthetic appreciation for the absurdity of the situation. David Park looked like he was rapidly calculating how many different ways this could end his diplomatic career, while Isabella seemed torn between mortification and maternal pride that their daughter had apparently decided to adopt an 8-foot murder machine. But it was Grixtal's reaction that would become the stuff of legend. The mighty Vorac ambassador, terror of a dozen star systems, scourge of the outer rim, looked down at the tiny human attached to his leg and felt something unprecedented happening in his thoracic cavity. It wasn't fear. He knew fear, had wielded it like a weapon for centuries. It wasn't anger, though his training told him this should be deeply offensive. It was confusion. Deep, fundamental, worldview-altering confusion. "Small human," he said carefully, his voice dropping to what he hoped was a less terrifying register. Are you not afraid of me?" Amy looked up at him with those bright blue eyes, and gave him the kind of smile that could power a small space station. "Why would I be scared of you? You're nice." "I am not nice," Grixatel replied, though for the first time in his life, the statement felt more like a question than a fact. "I am a predator, a warrior. I am designed to strike fear into the hearts of—" "Do you like juice boxes?" Amy interrupted, apparently having lost interest in his identity crisis in favor of more practical concerns. "I have extra in my backpack. Mommy always packs extra because sharing is caring, and caring people need proper nutrition." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the moment Ambassador Grixtal of the Vorthak hegemony discovered that everything he thought he knew about intimidation, dominance, and the natural order of the universe was about to be completely redesigned by a 6-year-old human with gap teeth and an unlimited supply of fruit punch. Now, if you think watching an apex predator experience an existential crisis is entertaining, you should see what happens when that same predator spends the next 3 hours being systematically adopted by a determined 6-year-old who has decided he needs improvement. Grixtal found himself in the unprecedented position of being led around the diplomatic lounge by a tiny human who had somehow convinced him to come meet everyone properly. Amy had apparently appointed herself as his personal social coordinator, and she took the job with the seriousness of a 5-star general planning a military campaign. "This is Ambassador Fluxara from the Centaurian Republic," Amy announced, dragging Grixtal over to a delegation of tall, willowy beings with flexible nasal appendages. "She's really nice, and she knows lots of languages. Ambassador Fluxara, this is my friend Grixtal. He's learning how to be social." The Centaurian ambassador looked up at 8 feet of barely contained killing machine and managed a diplomatically appropriate smile. "Ah, yes. Pleased to meet you. Socially." "Tell her about your eyes," Amy prompted, tugging on Grixtal's lower arm with the persistence of a very small, very determined tugboat. "The sparkly compound ones. They're really cool." Grixtal stared down at his self-appointed cultural attaché, his mandibles clicking in what observers were beginning to recognize as the Vorthak equivalent of complete bewilderment. My ocular array is designed for tracking multiple prey items simultaneously while calculating optimal strike vectors." "See?" Amy beamed up at Ambassador Fluxara. "He's really smart and modest. Daddy says modest people are the best people." This went on for roughly an hour. Amy introduced Grixtal to every single delegate in the lounge, providing editorial commentary on his various features. His claws are really sharp, but he's very careful with them, correcting his social technique. "You should smile more." "Well, maybe not with the teeth thing, that's kind of scary." And offering unsolicited advice on interspecies relations. "The Hydrons like it when you ask about their families, but don't ask the Silani about their weight because that's rude." Meanwhile, Sub-Commander Thexak watched this diplomatic catastrophe unfold from across the lounge with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. Thexak was everything a proper Vorthak warrior should be: ruthless, ambitious, and possessed of the emotional range of a particularly aggressive kitchen appliance. He had spent the last several decades waiting for an opportunity to challenge Grixtal's authority, and watching his commander being led around by a larval mammal was giving him ideas. "Commander," Thexak approached with the careful gait of someone trying very hard to look respectful while internally calculating angles of attack. "Perhaps we should discuss your current diplomatic strategy." Amy looked up at the new arrival with interest. "Ooh, are you friends with Grixtal? He's really nice, but he needs to work on his conversation skills. Do you want to see my rock collection? I have 17 different kinds, and they're all super shiny." Thexak stared down at the small human with the kind of expression usually reserved for discovering something unpleasant on the bottom of your shoe. "I do not collect rocks." "That's okay," Amy replied, with the boundless forgiveness of someone who had never met a problem she couldn't solve with enthusiasm. "Everyone has different hobbies. What do you like to do for fun?" "I plan military campaigns and sharpen my claws," Thexac replied flatly. Amy considered this for a moment. "That sounds kind of boring. You should try coloring. It's really relaxing, and you get to make pretty pictures. I have extra crayons." And that, dear friends, was the moment Sub-Commander Thexac decided that his commander had clearly lost his mind and needed to be relieved of duty before he brought shame upon their entire species. But Grixtal was dealing with problems of his own. Specifically, he was trying to reconcile his lifelong understanding of fear-based dominance with the fact that Amy had somehow convinced him to carry her juice box because your arms are longer and that's more efficient. This was not covered in any tactical manual he'd ever studied. "Grixtal," Amy said seriously, swinging her legs from where she was now perched on a diplomatic chair that put her roughly at his chest level. "Can I ask you something important?" "You may inquire," he replied carefully, having learned that agreeing to Amy's questions was like signing a contract written in a language you didn't speak. "Do you have kids?" The question hit Grixtal like a photon torpedo to the thorax. What?" "Kids. You know, little versions of you that you take care of and teach stuff to and love even when they track mud through the house." Amy swung her legs, thoughtfully. "Because you seem like you'd be a really good daddy. You're big and strong so you could protect them. And you're smart, so you could help with homework. And you have really good listening skills." Grixtal's compound eyes focused and refocused as he processed this assessment. "Vorthak do not. We do not engage in what other species call parenting. Our young are raised in communal warrior creches, where they learn to survive through competition and—" "That sounds really lonely," Amy interrupted, with the kind of matter-of-fact sadness that hit harder than any weapon. "Don't you miss them?" And for the first time in his 847 cycles of existence, Grixtal found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, there were things about Vorthak culture that weren't quite as perfect as he'd been taught. "I have never considered this perspective," he admitted. Amy nodded sagely. "Grown-ups sometimes forget to think about the important stuff because they're too busy with work. That's why kids are good for reminding them. Daddy says I'm his perspective consultant, which means I help him remember what's really important." "And what is really important?" Amy ticked off items on her fingers with the authority of someone who had clearly given this considerable thought. "Being nice to people, sharing your snacks, giving good hugs, saying please and thank you, and making sure everyone feels included. Oh, and also making sure everyone gets enough sleep, because cranky people make bad choices." Grixtal looked around the diplomatic lounge, where various species were carefully maintaining their territorial boundaries, engaging in subtle power plays, and generally treating each other with the kind of polite suspicion that had defined interstellar relations for millennia. Then he looked down at Amy, who had somehow managed to get half the delegates in the room to try her juice boxes, and was currently teaching a group of young Silani the proper technique for making paper airplanes. "Your approach to diplomacy is unconventional," he observed. "Daddy says I'm good at making friends because I don't worry about all the complicated stuff. I just figure everyone probably wants to be liked and have fun. So why not start there?" Amy grinned up at him. "It works pretty good. Want to see? Hey, Ambassador Fluxara, Come try to make a paper airplane. Grixtal's going to help." And somehow, though he would never be able to explain exactly how, Grixtal found himself carefully folding paper with his razor-sharp claws, while Amy provided detailed instructions and a running commentary on his technique. The Centaurian ambassador watched in fascination as the most feared predator in 3-star systems concentrated intensely on achieving the proper wing angle for optimal aerodynamic performance. A little more fold on the left. No, the other left. Perfect. "See? You're really good at this." Amy clapped as Grixtal's paper airplane sailed gracefully across the lounge, where it was caught by one of the Hydran delegates who examined it with apparent interest. "This is surprisingly satisfying," Grixtal admitted, studying his handiwork with the same intensity he usually reserved for battle tactics. "Right? Creating stuff is way more fun than breaking stuff. Although," Amy added thoughtfully, "sometimes you have to break stuff to make room for better stuff, so I guess both are important. Like when Daddy had to break down the old shed to build my swing set." Sub-Commander Thexak, watching this scene from across the lounge, felt something very much like nausea. His commander, his supposedly fearsome, intimidating commander, was discussing construction projects with a human larva while folding decorative paper sculptures. This was beyond mere weakness. This was something that didn't even have a word in Vorthak. "Commander," Thexak approached again, his voice carrying just enough edge to cut through Amy's ongoing airplane folding tutorial. "We need to discuss ship's business. Privately." Amy looked between the two Vorthak with the kind of perceptive intelligence that adults often underestimated in children. "Are you guys having a disagreement? Sometimes when people disagree, it's because they're both worried about something, but they're worried about different things. What are you worried about?" Thexak's mandibles clicked sharply. "I am concerned that our commander has forgotten what it means to be Vorthak." "Oh!" Amy's face lit up with understanding. "You're worried that because Grixtal is being nice to me, other people won't think he's tough anymore. That's silly. Really tough people don't have to prove they're tough all the time. They can just be tough when it's important, and be nice the rest of the time." She turned to Grixtal with the earnest expression of someone about to deliver profound wisdom. "You know what makes someone really scary? When they're super nice and friendly and good at making paper airplanes, but you know that if someone tried to hurt their friends, they would turn into the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. That's like having a secret superpower that only comes out when people really need it." Grixtal stared down at this tiny human who had somehow managed to articulate something he'd been feeling but couldn't name. The idea that true strength might come not from constant intimidation, but from the choice to be gentle when you could easily be terrible. "You think restraint is a form of power?" he asked. "Duh! Anyone can be mean when they're strong, but being strong and choosing to be kind, that's like being a superhero." Amy gestured enthusiastically, nearly launching herself off the chair in her excitement. "Bad guys are mean because they're scared of not being tough enough. Good guys are nice because they already know they're tough enough." Thexak listened to this exchange with growing horror. Not only was his commander being corrupted by mammalian philosophy, but the philosophy was actually starting to make a terrifying kind of sense. "This is ridiculous," he snarled. "We are predators, apex hunters. We do not concern ourselves with the emotional states of prey species." Amy turned to look at him with the kind of patient expression usually reserved for explaining basic concepts to particularly slow adults. "But if you're really the best hunters, wouldn't you want to understand how everyone thinks?" Daddy says the smartest people are the ones who try to understand everyone, even people they don't agree with. I do not need to understand prey. Thexak's voice rose enough to attract attention from across the lounge. I need to dominate them. Why? Amy asked simply. The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Thexak opened his mouth to deliver what should have been an obvious answer, but found himself fumbling for words that had always seemed self-evident before. Because that is what Vorthak do. But why do you do it? Amy persisted with the relentless curiosity of a child who had never learned that some questions weren't supposed to be asked. What happens after you dominate everyone? Do you feel happy? Do you make friends? Do you get to learn cool new stuff? Thexak stared at her, his compound eyes reflecting his growing confusion. In all his cycles of warrior training, no one had ever asked him what the point of dominance was beyond the dominance itself. We maintain order, he said finally. Whose order? Amy asked. And what kind of order? Is it the kind where everyone is happy and gets to do fun stuff together? Or the kind where everyone is too scared to do anything? And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the moment when Subcommander Thexak experienced his own existential crisis, courtesy of a 6-year-old human with an unlimited supply of inconvenient questions. Meanwhile, Grixtal was watching this exchange with a growing sense of, what was the word humans used? Pride? Yes, that was it. He felt proud of the small human who was systematically deconstructing military philosophy through the simple expedient of asking why until the answers stopped making sense. But pride, as it turned out, was about to become the least of his concerns. Because 3 decks down, the Stellar Harmony's sensors had just detected something that was going to test every theory about strength, protection, and the true nature of predators that Amy had just articulated. The Crimson Fang Raiders were closing fast, and they had heard some very interesting rumors about a certain Vorthak ambassador who had supposedly been tamed by a human child. Captain Dexra Vul was particularly interested in testing that theory. The first sign that something was wrong came when Amy paused mid-sentence, during her detailed explanation of why purple was the best crayon color, and tilted her head like a curious puppy. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked, looking around the diplomatic lounge, with the kind of innocent concern that immediately made every adult in the vicinity break out in a cold sweat. Grixtal's compound eyes shifted focus, his predatory instincts automatically cataloging sounds, movements, and potential threats. There, a subtle vibration in the ship's hull, the barely perceptible change in engine harmonics that suggested something had just docked with the Stellar Harmony without bothering to ask permission first. "Pirates!" he said flatly, his voice dropping back into the register that had made entire star systems reconsider their life choices. The word sent a ripple of panic through the assembled delegates. The Centaurians immediately began their traditional panic ritual, which involved a lot of nasal appendage fluttering and high-pitched vocalizations. The Silani started crystallizing into defensive formations, while the Hydrons began secreting what could charitably be called emergency lubricants, but mostly just made the floor extremely slippery. Amy, meanwhile, looked absolutely fascinated. Real pirates. Like in the stories. Do they have parrots and say, "Arr," and look for treasure? "The dangerous kind," Grixtal replied grimly, his warrior training kicking in as he automatically positioned himself between Amy and the lounge entrances. "The kind that take ships, cargo, and passengers for ransom." Oh. Amy considered this for a moment. Well, that's not very nice. Someone should probably tell them that taking other people's stuff is wrong. Before anyone could explain that pirates were typically not receptive to moral instruction, the lounge's main entrance exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Through the smoke strode a figure that looked like someone had taken the concept of space pirate and cranked it up to 11. Captain Dex Ravul was a Coraxian, a species that looked like someone had crossed a shark with a rhinoceros and then given it delusions of grandeur. She stood 7 feet tall, her hide covered in scars that told the story of a lifetime spent in violent disagreement with the universe, and her teeth were filed to points because, apparently, natural predator dentition wasn't intimidating enough. Behind her came a mixed crew of the galaxy's finest criminal specimens. Disgraced Vorthak warriors, rogue centaurians, and several species that most civilized worlds had restraining orders against. Well, 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 Captain Dexra's voice was like gravel being processed through a meat grinder with delusions of eloquence. Look what we have here. A diplomatic gathering, how civilized. Her eyes swept the room until they found Grixatal, and her scarred features twisted into what might generously be called a smile. And the famous Ambassador Grixtal. I have heard such interesting stories about you. Something about being domesticated by a human pet? The insult hit the assembled Vorthak like a physical blow. Sub-Commander Thexak's mandibles clicked furiously, while several of Grixtal's crew moved into defensive positions. But Amy, oblivious to the mounting tension, stepped forward with the fearless curiosity of someone who had never met a stranger. "Are you the captain?" she asked brightly. "That's so cool. I've never met a real space captain before. Is it fun flying around in space? Do you get to see lots of planets?" Captain Dexra stared down at the small human with the kind of confusion usually reserved for discovering that gravity had suddenly started working sideways. Did this larva just ask me about my career satisfaction? "Amy," David Park called urgently from across the room, "come back here right now." But Amy was already in full social mode, apparently having decided that the solution to this situation was more friendship. "You have really interesting teeth. Did you sharpen them yourself? My friend Billy lost a tooth last week, and the tooth fairy gave him a whole $1. Do you have tooth fairies on your planet?" What? "Silence," Captain Dexra roared, her patience for small talk having reached its absolute limit. "This ship is now under the control of the Crimson Fang Raiders. You will all surrender your valuables and prepare to be processed for ransom." Amy looked genuinely concerned. "That sounds like stealing. Stealing is wrong because it makes people sad, and that's not nice. Maybe we could talk about this? Daddy always says that most problems can be solved with good communication and snacks." "Enough!" Dexra's hand moved to the plasma rifle at her side. "One more word from the chattering mammal and—" That's when something fundamental shifted in the room's atmosphere. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and suddenly every prey instinct in the lounge started screaming that something very, very dangerous had just woken up. Grixtal moved. It wasn't the fluid grace of his earlier intimidation displays. This was something primal and terrible, like watching a mountain decide to relocate. He flowed between Amy and the pirate captain with the kind of speed that made physics professors weep, his 4 arms extending to their full span as every weapon system evolution had gifted his species came online simultaneously. "Captain," he said, his voice now carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding." Dexra actually took a step backward before catching herself. "The great Grixtal, finally showing some spine. Though I hear you've gone soft. playing nursemaid to human spawn. You heard correctly, Grixtal replied, and his calm acknowledgment sent more chills through the room than any roar could have. I have indeed been educated by this small human. She has taught me many things about the nature of strength. Amy beamed up at him. See? I told you that you were learning. Yes, Grixtal continued, his compound eyes never leaving the pirate captain. She taught me that true predators don't need to prove their dominance through constant displays. They simply are. She taught me that the strongest beings are those who choose restraint, who use their power to protect rather than intimidate. Captain Dexra was starting to look less confident. Philosophical nonsense! You've been neutered by mammalian sentiment. And most importantly, Grixtal said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, she taught me what it feels like to have something worth protecting. The change in Grixtal was visible now. This wasn't the ceremonial warrior who had entered the lounge hours earlier. This was something older, deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. Every line of his body spoke of violence, held in perfect check, like a quantum torpedo with a broken safety switch. So let me explain something to you, Captain, he continued conversationally. For 847 cycles, I have been what you might call a professional predator. I have studied every known method of inflicting pain, catalogued 17 different ways to kill with each of my limbs, and mastered combat techniques that most species have forbidden by interstellar treaty. Amy tugged on his lower arm. Grixtal? Are you okay? You sound kind of scary again. He looked down at her with an expression that somehow managed to be both gentle and absolutely terrifying. I'm fine, small friend. I'm simply explaining to the captain why threatening you was a very poor tactical decision. Oh, okay. Amy turned to Captain Dexra with helpful enthusiasm. He's really smart about fighting stuff, but usually he doesn't like to talk about it, because he says violence should be a last resort. But I guess, if you're going to be mean to people, he might have to use his scary skills. That's what good friends do. They protect each other. Captain Dexra was beginning to realize that she had made what military strategists call a significant error in threat assessment. The Vorac standing before her wasn't weakened by his attachment to the human child. He was weaponized by it. Now then, Grixtal said pleasantly, you were saying something about processing my friends for ransom. What happened next would later be described in military academies across the galaxy as a master class in why you should never threaten something a Vorac has decided to protect. Captain Dexra, to her credit, recognized the change in Grixtal's demeanor and tried to adjust her strategy accordingly. Unfortunately for her, accordingly still involved pointing a plasma rifle at a 6-year-old human, which turned out to be roughly equivalent to poking a sleeping dragon with a stick made of pure stupidity. "Stand down, Vorac," she snarled, her weapon trained on Amy. "One move, and the mammal becomes—" She never got to finish that sentence. Grixtal moved with the kind of speed that made quantum physicists question their understanding of space-time. One moment he was standing protectively near Amy. The next he was somehow behind Captain Dexra, having crossed 12 feet of open space through what appeared to be a brief vacation in a parallel dimension. The plasma rifle went flying, disassembled into its component parts before it hit the ground. Captain Dexra found herself suspended in the air by one very large, very annoyed Vorac hand wrapped around her throat. "As I was explaining," Grixtal continued conversationally, as if he hadn't just violated several laws of physics, "my young friend has taught me that strength isn't about intimidation, it's about purpose. Amy clapped her hands delightedly. Wow, you're really fast. Can you teach me to do that? Perhaps when you're older, Grixtal replied, still holding the struggling pirate captain. Right now, I'm having a discussion with these individuals about proper manners. The rest of the pirate crew had the collective realization that they had made a career-limiting decision. Several of them tried to raise their weapons, but Grixtal's crew, who had been watching their commander's transformation with growing amazement, suddenly remembered that they were also highly trained predators who happened to be very fond of their ambassador. Sub-Commander Thexak, in particular, seemed to have experienced something of an epiphany. Watching Grixtal protect the small human with such focused intensity had finally answered his question about what true strength looked like. "You know what your problem is," Amy said helpfully to Captain Dexra, who was still dangling from Grixtal's grip. "You're trying to be scary to make people do what you want, but that just makes everyone sad and angry. If you were nice instead, people might actually want to help you with stuff." This is impossible," Dexra wheezed. "You're supposed to be domesticated, weakened." Grixtal's compound eyes focused on her with the intensity of a targeting computer. "I have indeed been changed by my encounter with humanity, but perhaps you misunderstood the nature of that change." He set the pirate captain down gently, though gently in this context still involved her knees nearly buckling from the experience. "You see," he continued, "before I met Amy, I was a predator who fought for dominance, for territory, for the abstract concept of honor. These are adequate motivations, but they lack focus." Amy nodded sagely. "Like when I clean my room because Mommy says I have to, versus when I clean it because I want my toys to be happy and organized. Same job, but it feels different." "Exactly." Grixtal smiled down at her, and the fact that a Vorthak's smile could somehow be both terrifying to enemies and reassuring to friends was perhaps the most diplomatically useful discovery in recent history. "Now I fight not for dominance, but for protection. Not for territory, but for family. Not for abstract honor, but for very specific love." He turned back to Captain Dexra, who was beginning to understand that she had accidentally picked a fight with the Galactic, equivalent of a nuclear-powered grizzly bear with attachment issues. "This makes me not weaker, Captain. This makes me absolutely, unequivocally, apocalyptically dangerous to anyone who threatens what I protect." The pirate crew surrendered, with what historians would later note as commendable efficiency and survival instinct. As security forces led the Crimson Fang raiders away, Amy tugged on Grixtal's arm again. "Are you really going to stay with us? Like, for keeps?" "If your parents will permit it," Grixtal replied. "I would very much like to request assignment as cultural liaison to the human colonies. There appears to be much I could learn from your species about effective relationship building." David and Isabella exchanged glances. On one hand, their daughter had somehow convinced an apex predator to become her personal bodyguard through the power of friendship and juice boxes. On the other hand, she had somehow convinced an apex predator to become her personal bodyguard through the power of friendship and juice boxes. "I think," David said carefully, "that could be arranged." Amy let out a squeal of delight and launched herself into another of her devastating hugs, this time around Grixtal's middle. "This is the best day ever. Wait until you meet Mr. Whiskers. He's my hamster, and he's going to love you. And I can show you my room and teach you about Earth cartoons, and we can make more paper airplanes and—" As Amy chattered away about all the wonderful experiences awaiting her new friend, Grixtal caught Sub-Commander Thexak's eye. His second-in-command approached with something that might have been respect, or possibly religious awe. "Commander," Thexax said quietly, "I believe I misunderstood the situation." "As did I," Grixtal replied, watching Amy demonstrate the proper technique for making friendship bracelets to a fascinated group of alien delegates. "It appears that the humans have weaponized something we never considered." "What's that, sir?" Grixtal looked down at the small human who had accidentally revolutionized his understanding of strength, purpose, and the true nature of predation. She was currently trying to teach Ambassador Fluxara how to braid ribbons, and the Centaurian was approaching the task with the serious concentration of someone learning a vital diplomatic skill. "Love," he said simply. "They've weaponized love. And apparently, it's the most powerful force in the galaxy." Amy looked up from her crafting lesson and beamed at him. "Did you say something about love? Love is the best. It makes everything better, and it's free, and you can give as much as you want, and you never run out." And somewhere in the depths of space, the universe quietly updated its understanding of what it meant to be truly, genuinely, undefeatable. It looked, as it turned out, a lot like a 6-year-old human with gap teeth and an unlimited supply of hugs.